The silence in a restaurant like this had a texture. It was thick, woven from the clink of heavy silver on porcelain, the murmur of conversations kept deliberately low, and the weight of money. So much money. Chloe felt it press down on her, a physical presence in the air-conditioned chill of the room. The beige dress she'd spent 2 weeks convincing herself to buy suddenly felt cheap, the fabric flimsy against the plush velvet of the booth. She smoothed it over her thighs for the 10th time, the gesture doing nothing to soothe the frantic hummingbird beating against her ribs. This was a mistake. A catastrophic, 5-star, linen tablecloth mistake. Her cousin Lena had called it a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. A friend of a friend needed a favor, a respectable date for a very important, very private businessman. Lena had sold it as an adventure. He's rich, Chloe. Like, ridiculously rich. And handsome, apparently. Just have dinner. Be your charming self. What's the worst that can happen? Chloe could now list at least a dozen worse things, starting with the way the maitre d' had looked at her, his gaze flicking over her full figure, her dark skin, her carefully styled braids, and landing on something that looked suspiciously like pity. She was an anomaly here, a glitch in the carefully curated matrix of old money and quiet power. She was 20 years old, a library sciences student who spent her days in the hushed reverence of archives, surrounded by the scent of aging paper and leather. Her world was small and safe and ordered. This place was the opposite of all of those things. She was checking the time on her phone for the 5th time when a shadow fell over the table. He moved like the room owed him space, the other patrons parting for him without a conscious thought. He wasn't loud or ostentatious. He was simply absolute. He wore a charcoal suit that was so perfectly tailored it seemed less like clothing and more like a second skin, one that hinted at the disciplined strength beneath. Tom Ford, her mind supplied, a useless bit of trivia picked up from a magazine. He slid into the booth opposite her, his movements economical and silent. He didn't offer a greeting. He didn't smile. He just watched her, his eyes dark, unnervingly still. They were the eyes of a predator, not because they were cruel, but because they were constantly assessing, calculating, seeing everything she was trying to hide. "You're Chloe," he said. It wasn't a question. His voice was a low baritone, smooth and cold as the marble floor. "And you're my date," she managed, the words feeling foolish and small in the cavernous space between them. He ignored her attempt at levity. His gaze swept over her, from her face down to her hands resting on the table, and back up again. It wasn't a leer. It was an inventory. He was cataloging her, filing her away. She felt her skin prickle, a flush of heat creeping up her neck. She was used to being looked at, but not like this. Not like she was a problem to be solved. A waiter appeared, silent and efficient, placing a bottle of sparkling water on the table and filling their glasses. The man across from her didn't acknowledge him. His focus remained entirely on her. "Do you know who I am?" he asked. Lena said your name was Jinwoo, that you're in finance. A flicker of something, amusement, maybe, or contempt, passed through his eyes. It was gone as quickly as it appeared. She was half right. He leaned forward slightly, the subtle scent of something clean and sharp, like cedar and cold night air, reaching her. This was a test. Or an insult. I haven't decided which yet. Chloe's brow furrowed. A test? I don't understand. My business associates have a peculiar sense of humor, he said, his voice dropping even lower. They believe they can find a weakness, a pressure point. They search for something to unbalance me. His eyes met hers again, and this time there was no mistaking the cold dismissal in them. They sent you. The implication hit her like a physical blow, winding her. They sent her. A young, plus-sized black woman. A girl who so clearly did not belong in his world. She was the punchline to a joke she hadn't even known she was a part of. The humiliation was a hot, metallic taste in the back of her throat. All her insecurities, all the little fears she had pushed down to even walk in here, rushed back up to choke her. "So, I'm an insult," she said, her voice trembling slightly. She hated it. She hated him for making it tremble. He didn't soften. He didn't apologize. He gave her the courtesy of a cold, brutal honesty. "You are a message," he corrected her, his tone flat and final. "A message I have received. But you are not a person I am having dinner with." He reached into his suit jacket, pulling out a slim wallet. He placed several $100 bills on the table. "For your time. Now leave." Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. Hot, angry, mortified tears. She blinked them back fiercely, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her cry. The money on the table felt like the final, crushing weight of his judgment. He wasn't just dismissing her. He was paying her off, erasing the last 10 minutes as a transaction. She stood up, her chair scraping softly against the floor. Her hands were shaking. "Keep your money," she whispered, her throat tight. She turned to walk away, to flee the suffocating silence and his dissecting gaze. She just wanted to be gone, to be back in her small apartment where she could breathe. She took 2 steps. That was when the world exploded. The soft symphony of the restaurant shattered into a cacophony of screams and breaking glass. The floor-to-ceiling window behind their booth imploded, spraying crystalline shards across the room. A woman shrieked. A man yelled. Chloe froze, her mind unable to process the sudden violence. Before she could even turn, an arm like a steel band wrapped around her waist, yanking her backward. She stumbled, a cry catching in her throat as she was pulled down, hard, against a firm body. Jinwoo. He had moved faster than she thought possible, a blur of controlled motion. He shoved her down behind the overturned table, his body a solid shield over hers. The scent of cedar and gunpowder filled her senses. "Stay down," he commanded, his voice a low growl in her ear. His breath was warm against her skin. The pop-pop-pop of silenced gunfire echoed through the chaos. Chloe squeezed her eyes shut, her face pressed into the expensive wool of his suit jacket. She could feel the steady, calm rhythm of his heart against her cheek, a stark contrast to the frantic terror seizing her own. He wasn't scared. He was working. She felt him shift, the muscles in his back coiling. There was a metallic click, a sound she recognized from movies, but which sounded infinitely more sinister in real life. He moved, peeling himself away from her just enough to peer over their makeshift cover. Another series of shots, closer this time. A heavy thud as a body hit the floor nearby. He was back over her in an instant. "We're leaving. On my signal. You run for the kitchen door. Do not stop. Do not look back. Do you understand?" She could only nod, her face still buried in his chest. He grabbed her chin, forcing her to look at him. His eyes were no longer cold and assessing. They were black ice, lethal and focused. "I said, do you understand me, Chloe?" He said her name. He said her name, and it sounded like a weapon. "Yes," she breathed. "Go." He pushed her, and she scrambled, her legs clumsy beneath her. She ran, fueled by pure adrenaline, her lungs burning. She didn't look back. She dove through the swinging doors of the kitchen into a world of stainless steel, shouting staff, and the smell of fear. Hands grabbed her, pulled her along. She was part of a tide of terrified people flooding out a back exit into a grimy alley. The cold night air hit her, and she gasped, leaning against a brick wall, her body shaking uncontrollably. She was alive. She was out. But before the relief could fully register, a black sedan screeched to a halt at the mouth of the alley. The back door flew open. Kwon Jinwoo emerged from the chaos behind her, not a hair out of place, his suit jacket immaculate save for a dusting of plaster on the shoulder. His face was a mask of grim purpose. He didn't look at anyone else. His eyes found her, locking on her instantly. He crossed the alley in 3 long strides, his presence silencing the panicked whispers around them. He took her arm, his grip firm but not painful. "Get in the car."
"What?"
"No, I have to go home," she stammered, trying to pull away. "Your home is not safe," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "The men who did this saw you with me. They think you are important. You are a loose end." "My loose end." He pulled her toward the car, his strength overwhelming. "You're not going anywhere." He pushed her into the back of the sedan. The door slammed shut with a heavy, final thud, the lock engaging with an audible click. The car sped away, leaving the sirens and the screaming behind. Chloe was plunged back into a world of silence, trapped in the expensive, cedar-scented interior, with the most dangerous man she had ever met. The city lights blurred past the tinted windows, a world she no longer belonged to. The penthouse was a cage of glass and steel, perched high above the glittering sprawl of Los Angeles. It was minimalist and cold, decorated in shades of gray and black, with not a single personal photograph or object to betray the humanity of its owner. It felt less like a home and more like a fortress. Chloe sat on the edge of a severe leather sofa that probably cost more than her college tuition, her arms wrapped around herself. The beige dress was rumpled, stained with something she didn't want to identify. Jin-woo stood by the vast window, his back to her, speaking in low, rapid Korean on his phone. Even in another language, his tone was unmistakable. It was the voice of absolute command. A man in a dark suit, his face impassive, stood guard by the elevator. She was a prisoner. When he finally ended the call, he turned to face her. He had shed his jacket, and in the white button-down shirt, with his sleeves rolled to his forearms, he looked younger, but no less menacing. A long, thin scar ran along his left forearm, pale against his skin. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice quiet. "I told you. My name is Chloe. I'm a student." "Who arranged the date?" "My cousin Lena. She works for a catering company. She said one of her clients, a Mr. Park, needed a favor for an associate. That's all I know." His jaw tightened at the name. "Park," he repeated, the name a curse on his tongue. He walked over to the bar and poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into a heavy crystal glass. He didn't offer her any. "Park is not my associate. He is my rival. And he is a man who enjoys cruel jokes." He took a slow sip of the whiskey. "He set this up to publicly humiliate me, to show his people that I could be made a fool of. And he used you to do it." The words from the restaurant came back to her. "You are a message." He had been right. The shame was still there, but now it was laced with a cold spike of fear. She wasn't just an awkward blind date. She was a pawn in a war between powerful, violent men. So, the attack, that was him. "It was his opening move," Jin-woo said. "An attempt to see how I would react. To see if the message had landed. Now he knows you were with me when it happened. He will assume you are my confidant, my lover, my weakness." Chloe let out a shaky laugh that sounded more like a sob. "Weakness? He saw me for 10 minutes. You told me to leave. It doesn't matter what is true. It only matters what they believe." He finished his drink in one swallow, setting the glass down with a sharp click. "Until Park is dealt with, you are a target. Which means you will stay here." Days bled into one another. Chloe was confined to the penthouse, a ghost haunting its sterile, empty rooms. She ate meals brought by silent men in suits, read books from a sparsely populated shelf, and stared out at a city that felt 1,000,000 miles away. Jin-woo was a phantom, coming and going at odd hours. Sometimes she would wake in the middle of the night to the sound of his low voice in the living room and know that he was still awake, still fighting his unseen war. One evening, he came back later than usual. There was a dark stain spreading across the side of his white shirt, and he was moving stiffly. The man with him, his ever-present shadow, looked worried. "It's nothing," Jin-woo snapped in Korean, waving the other man off. He went to the bar, trying to pour himself a drink, but his hand was unsteady. The bottle clinked against the glass. Chloe found herself on her feet, moving toward him before she had made a conscious decision to. "You're hurt." "It is a scratch," he said, turning his back to her, a clear dismissal. But she saw him wince as he reached for the glass. "Let me see," she said, her voice soft but firm. It was the tone she used at the library to calm anxious students during finals week. He turned, his eyes flashing with irritation, ready to refuse. But he stopped. He looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time since that night. He saw not a liability or a message, but just her. And for some reason, he didn't send her away. He gave a curt nod. She led him to the sofa and gently helped him remove his shirt. A crude bandage was taped to his side, already soaked through. "This needs to be cleaned and stitched," she said, her voice clinical, pushing down the tremor in her hands. "Do you have a first aid kit?" His man brought one. It was more like a field surgeon's bag. As she worked, cleaning the shallow knife wound with antiseptic, her fingers brushing against his skin, the silence in the room became charged. He was so still, watching her every move. His skin was warm. The muscles of his torso were coiled and hard, a landscape of disciplined power. Her fingers traced the edge of an older, uglier scar near his ribs. It was puckered and white. He flinched, an involuntary jerk. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He was quiet for a long moment. "It was a long time ago," he said, his voice rough. "I was careless. I thought I could protect her." Chloe didn't ask who her was. The wound in his voice was deeper than the one on his side. It was a place of profound failure, a ghost he still carried. He, this man of absolute control, had lost control once, and someone had paid the price. That was his vulnerability. That was the thing he never wanted to happen again. She finished stitching the wound, her work neat and precise. Her hands didn't shake. When she was done, her fingers lingered for a second too long on his skin. He didn't pull away. He just watched her face, his expression unreadable. A few days later, a commotion by the elevator woke her from a light doze on the sofa. Jinwoo's men were arguing in hushed, urgent tones. Jinwoo appeared, his face a thundercloud. "What is it?" he demanded. "Park's men were seen near your old apartment building," one of the men said, not looking at Chloe, but clearly aware of her presence. "Asking questions. About her." Chloe's blood ran cold. Her apartment. Her life. They were trying to erase it, to erase her. During the ensuing chaos, as Jinwoo issued a string of cold, lethal orders over the phone, the guard at the elevator was distracted. The door stood open. It was her chance. She could walk in, press the button for the lobby, and vanish. She could run, disappear, try to reclaim the life that had been stolen from her. She took a step toward it, then another. Her heart hammered in her chest. Freedom was right there. But she stopped. She thought of Park's men. They weren't just looking for her, they were hunting her. Leaving now wouldn't make her free, it would make her dead. And a strange, unwelcome thought followed. Leaving would also leave Jinwoo exposed. They would know they had found his weakness. She turned away from the elevator. She made a deliberate choice. She walked into the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and when Jinwoo finally hung up the phone, his face carved from stone, she was standing there, waiting. He saw her, and his eyes widened almost imperceptibly. He knew she could have left. He crossed the room until he was standing in front of her, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. He said nothing. He simply looked at her, the silence stretching, becoming a tangible thing between them. Then, he lifted his hand, slowly, as if not to startle her. His fingers, warm and calloused, brushed a stray braid from her cheek. His thumb rested just below her eye, a touch so gentle it made her breath catch. It wasn't a gesture of passion, but of possession, of assessment, a silent acknowledgement. She had stayed. And in doing so, she had changed the rules of the game. "They will not touch you," he said, his voice a low vow. "I will burn Park's entire world to the ground before he lays a hand on you." That was the moment she understood she was no longer just a prisoner. She was something far more dangerous, his. The war with Park escalated. It was no longer a series of subtle moves, but open warfare fought in the shadows of the city. One afternoon, Jinwoo decided to move her to a different safe house. The transition was supposed to be seamless, clinical. It was anything but. The ambush happened in a parking garage downtown. 2 black cars boxed them in, men with guns pouring out before their own vehicle had even come to a complete stop. Jinwoo's driver was dead before Chloe registered the first shot. Jinwoo reacted with the same chilling calm as before, shoving her down onto the floor of the car and returning fire through the shattered windshield. Glass rained down on her. The car shook with the impact of bullets. Amid the terror, a strange clarity descended. He was pinned down. They were going to die here. The fire suppression system, he grunted, reloading his weapon with swift, practiced movements. In the trunk, there's a manual release behind the seat. She scrambled, pulling at the leather panel. Her fingers found a small, metal ring. I have it. Pull it when I tell you. It will fill the garage with foam. You will have 30 seconds to get to the stairwell on the left. Run. He laid down a volley of covering fire, then yelled. Now. Chloe pulled the ring. A thick, white foam began to hiss and spray from vents under the car, instantly obscuring everything. She shoved the car door open and ran, choking on the chemical smell. She made it to the stairwell door, her hand on the handle, and risked a glance back. Jinwoo was providing cover, but he was limping. He'd been hit in the leg. One of Park's men was closing in on his blind side. There was no time. Chloe didn't think. She acted. She saw a discarded fire extinguisher on the wall beside her. She grabbed the heavy metal canister, hefted it, and charged back into the foam. She swung it with all her strength, catching the man behind the knees. He went down with a cry of pain and surprise. The opening was all Jinwoo needed. A single, precise shot, and the man was still. Jinwoo grabbed her hand, his grip like iron, and pulled her into the stairwell, slamming the heavy fire door behind them. They collapsed onto the concrete landing, chests heaving. You came back, he said, his voice laced with disbelief. You were hurt, she panted, looking down at the growing red stain on his trouser leg. He looked from his leg to her face, his dark eyes searching for something. You should have run. You would have died. They stayed there for a long moment, the sounds of shouting and confusion echoing from the garage. He was bleeding. He was mortal. And she had just crossed a line. She had participated. She hadn't pulled a trigger, but her actions had led directly to a man's death. The quiet, orderly world of the library was gone. It had burned to ash in a foam-filled parking garage. Later, in the new safe house, a sterile, anonymous apartment, she tended to his wound. It was a through-and-through, painful but clean. As she wrapped the bandage, he watched her, his guard finally, completely down. You look at me, he said, his voice rough with pain, and something else. And you don't flinch. Everyone else flinches. I'm too tired to flinch, she admitted, her voice raw. And too scared of what happens if I look away. He reached out, his hand covering hers where it rested on his knee. His touch was electric. Don't get tired, Chloe, he said. It wasn't a request. It was a command, a plea. Don't look away. It was not a declaration of love. It was something far more honest, more dangerous. It was a confession. An admission that in this world of violence and betrayal, her steady gaze had become his anchor. The final move came 2 days later. It wasn't an attack. It was a message. A package was delivered to the safe house. Inside was a single, leather-bound book from the rare archives collection at her library, a place only she had access to. Tucked inside was a photo of her cousin Lena, with a red circle drawn over her face. The message was clear. They knew who she was. They knew who she cared about. The war was no longer his. It was hers. The confrontation happened at a deserted shipyard. Park had Lena. He wanted to trade her for Chloe. Jinwoo had forbidden her from coming, but Chloe knew this was her fight now. She used the burner phone Jinwoo had given her to make her own arrangements, feeding one of Jinwoo's younger, more ambitious soldiers a piece of false information that would get her to the meeting point. She was done being a pawn. When she arrived, the scene was already set. Park stood on a loading dock, Lena crying beside him, a gun to her head. Jinwoo and his men were positioned behind a stack of shipping containers, a tense standoff. The girl for the liability, Park shouted, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. A simple exchange, Kwan. Or your pet's family pays the price. Jinwoo's face was stone, but Chloe saw the fury in his eyes. He was trapped. It's okay, Chloe said, stepping out into the open space between them. All guns turned to her. Let her go, Park. You want me? Here I am. Chloe, no. Jinwoo's voice was a whip crack. She ignored him, her eyes locked on Park. You think I'm his weakness, she said, her voice steady, projecting a confidence she did not feel. You're wrong. You set up a blind date to insult him. You sent a fat, black girl, thinking it was the ultimate humiliation. But you don't understand him at all. He doesn't care about things like that. He cares about loyalty. And you, Park, you betrayed your own family to get where you are. He told me. It was a bluff, a wild guess based on a half-overheard conversation, but it landed. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Park's face. His men shifted, glancing at each other. That was the opening. In that split second of distraction, Jinwoo's team moved. The air erupted in gunfire. Chloe dropped to the ground as she'd been taught. When the chaos subsided, Park was on the ground, and Lena was being hustled to safety, sobbing but alive. Jinwoo came to Chloe, his face grim. He pulled her to her feet, his hands checking her for injuries. That was the most foolish, reckless thing you have ever done. It worked, she said simply. He stared at her, the last of the adrenaline fading, leaving something raw and undeniable in its place. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking her cheeks. They thought you were my weakness, he said, his voice low and thick with emotion. They were wrong, he paused, his dark eyes holding hers. You are my reason. Her old life was a ghost. She could never go back to the archives, to her small apartment, to the person she used to be. The cost of her survival was her innocence. The cost for him was the impenetrable wall he had built around his heart, now breached. Nothing in their world was free. A week later, standing at the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse, the city lights a galaxy at their feet, he made her the offer. A new identity, a bank account with more money than she could spend in a lifetime, a quiet life in any city she chose, a clean slate, a way out. He was giving her a choice, the one thing no one else in his world ever got. She looked at him, at this lethal, broken man who had shown her a terrifying and brutal world, but who had also looked at her and seen not an insult, but a reason. She thought of the quiet safety of her past and the violent uncertainty of this future. Chloe didn't say a word. She turned back to the window, watching the endless stream of headlights on the freeway below. He came to stand beside her, the silence between them no longer heavy, but full. She reached out and took his hand. His fingers, scarred and strong, curled around hers, a silent, binding contract. The choice was made.